The Bank of England publishes it openly in its own educational materials. In the modern monetary system, money is created when banks make loans. The money is the debt. More must be repaid than was created, so the supply must grow continuously, or the system collapses. This is not conspiracy. It is the stated operating mechanism of the current system. The question this investigation asks is, what was the operating mechanism of the system it replaced? And why does the timeline of its replacement match the dismantling of the pre-reset free public infrastructure almost exactly? I want to start with a fact that is not in dispute. That is published by the Bank of England in its own educational materials, and that most people have never encountered, because the educational system that was built in the post-reset period has very specific ideas about what economic facts are considered foundational and which are considered advanced. The fact is this: in the modern monetary system, money is created by banks when they make loans. Not all money is created this way, but the vast majority of money in circulation in any modern economy was, at some point in its existence, created as a bank loan. The bank created the money by crediting the borrower's account. The borrower now has money. The bank now has an asset, the loan. The money exists because the obligation exists. And the obligation carries interest, meaning that more money must be repaid than was created, meaning that the money supply must grow continuously to service the interest obligations on previously created money, meaning that the economy must expand continuously, or the debt service will consume the money supply and the system will collapse. This is not a controversial description. This is the standard description of how the monetary system works, published by central banks in documents specifically intended to explain the monetary system to the public. The only reason it sounds like a conspiracy theory to most people is that it was not taught to them in school. The educational system of the post-reset period teaches the history of money, the history of barter and commodity money and coinage and paper currency, and eventually the modern system as a story of progressive development. Each stage is more sophisticated than the one before. The modern debt-based system is the culmination of this progressive development. It is the most sophisticated monetary arrangement that human civilization has produced. Unless it isn't. Unless the sophistication runs in a different direction entirely. And the post-reset monetary system is not the culmination of monetary development, but the replacement of a more sophisticated system with a less sophisticated one that better serves the interests of the institutions that administer it. Unless what the reset replaced was a system that didn't require debt as its operational mechanism, that didn't require continuous growth to remain solvent, that funded public infrastructure without creating corresponding obligations, that allowed the free distribution of water and energy and public facilities without requiring the people who use them to borrow money to pay for them. The physical evidence of such a system is in the pre-reset cities. I have discussed the free fountain networks and the public infrastructure at length in previous investigations. Here I want to focus on a different kind of evidence, the numismatic record, the coinage and currency artifacts of the pre-reset period. Specifically, the artifacts that appear in collections and estate sales, with dates and denominations and inscriptions that don't fit the official monetary history of the regions where they were found. There are objects in numismatic collections, objects that appear regularly in estate auctions across North America and Europe, that are described by the auction catalogs as tokens, or trade goods, or foreign currency of uncertain origin. These descriptions are the numismatic equivalent of the architectural unknown function designation. They mean, this object is money-shaped, this object was clearly made to circulate as a medium of exchange, and we cannot identify what monetary system it belonged to. The inscriptions are sometimes in scripts that are not definitively identified with known historical writing systems. The metallic compositions, in cases where analysis has been performed, are sometimes unusual, incorporating alloys or material combinations that are not characteristic of standard historical coinage practices. And the dates, or numerical markings where they appear, are sometimes in numerical systems that don't correspond to the calendar systems in use in the regions where the objects were found. What monetary system issued these objects? The official response is that they are from known historical civilizations whose coinage tradition is poorly documented in that specific region, or that they are tokens from private commercial operations whose records have not survived, or that they are forgeries or reproductions created in later periods for commercial reasons. These explanations are applied case by case, object by object, without asking whether the objects that can't be identified with any known monetary system might collectively constitute evidence of an unknown monetary system. A monetary system that circulated over a large geographic area, that produced objects of sufficient quantity and distribution that they are still appearing in estate auctions a century and a half after the monetary system that issued them ceased to operate. What would a non-debt monetary system look like in its material form? This is the question that the unidentified currency objects might answer if they were studied systematically rather than catalogued individually as curiosities. The debt-based monetary system produces currency whose fundamental nature is an obligation. Paper money is a claim on the issuing bank. Coin money is a claim on the state that backs it. The non-debt monetary system that I'm postulating would produce currency whose fundamental nature was different. Not a claim on an institution, a representation of value already in existence, a receipt for goods or services or energy already provided, rather than a promise of future repayment. The physical character of such currency might be different from the obligation-based currency we know. It might be made from materials whose value is intrinsic rather than assigned. It might carry inscriptions that describe what it represents rather than what it obliges. It might circulate in a system whose mathematics is different from the compound interest mathematics of the debt economy. This is speculative. I know it is speculative. What I can say is that the pre-reset cities, with their free public infrastructure and their universal provision of basic goods, were funded somehow. The elaborate hydraulic engineering of the fountain networks required investment. The construction of the public bath complexes required investment. The maintenance of the energy distribution systems, whatever their physical form, required investment. And the investment occurred without the population of those cities being in the kind of systemic debt that the modern monetary system requires for the funding of public infrastructure. There was something else. Some mechanism by which investment in public goods occurred without creating corresponding obligations for the people who benefited from those goods. The central banking system replaced that mechanism, not because the debt mechanism is more efficient at providing public goods. The debt mechanism is demonstrably less efficient at providing public goods, which is why the quality and universality of public infrastructure has declined, in real terms, in the century since the central banking system was installed. The central banking system replaced the prior mechanism, because the prior mechanism did not create the kind of economic dependency that the post-reset administrative system required. People who had free water and free energy and free public facilities did not need to work in the specific way at the specific hours for the specific compensation that industrial labor required. People without economic dependency are not economically manageable in the way that industrial capitalism requires. The debt system solved that problem. It created the dependency. It made the basic conditions of civilized life into purchases that required income. And in doing so, it made the population manageable in exactly the way the post-reset administrative order required. This is the function of the monetary reset. Not the accumulation of wealth by the banking class, though that is certainly a result. The function is the creation of a managed population. A population that must sell its labor to survive. A population that carries debt from birth through the debt-financed infrastructure of the public services it uses, and that will carry debt until death. A population that is, at every moment, economically obligated to the institutions that issue the currency and the institutions that provide the credit. A population that cannot easily imagine an alternative because the educational system built by the same administrative order doesn't teach that alternatives existed, let alone what they were. The unidentified currency objects in the numismatic collections and the estate auctions are the material trace of the alternative. They are the receipts and tokens and exchange objects of a system that ran on a different principle. They are in the collections, unlabeled and unexamined, waiting for someone to ask not just what they are, but what system they served. And when that question is asked seriously, when those objects are studied as a corpus rather than as individual curiosities, the answer that the evidence points toward is an economic system that provided public goods without creating public debt, that funded infrastructure without requiring interest payments, that circulated value without creating obligation. That ran, in other words, on a principle so different from what replaced it that the monetary economists of the post-reset world genuinely have no theoretical framework for it, no category, no model, just the word unknown, which in numismatics, as in architecture, is always the word for this doesn't fit the story we've already decided to tell. If the free fountains, the public baths, and the universal infrastructure of the pre-reset cities were funded without creating permanent debt in the populations that used them, and the central banking system was installed at precisely the moment that infrastructure was being demolished, what principle did the new system actually replace? And who decided scarcity was the only workable model? Tell us what you think in the comments. And share this if the history of debt feels like a history of something taken.